Your love and devotion to our family and to the family of nations you have served so diligently all these years. May flights of angels sing thee to thy rest. The timeline of King Charles's love life suggests that fairy tales sometimes exist for royalty. And I suppose in love, of course, whatever in love means. King Charles's love life was the object of speculation with much heartache, scandals, and an undying romance. Although some agree that his love life has beaten the odds following through from the disastrous marriage to Princess Diana. Both the Prince and Princess of Wales went ahead with their engagements today, as if to show that they have continuing, albeit separate, roles to play, and a life bond with Queen Camilla. But now, at 76, the monarch has made a rare and intense personal confession that challenges everything we believed about his greatest love. Was destiny always pulling him toward one woman? Or is there a hidden chapter in the king's heart? Join us as we reveal King Charles's emotional reflection at 76, a complicated romance. King Charles III's marriage to Camilla Parker Bowles, the woman in his heart for 4 decades, was not merely a wedding, but the closing chapter in a love story that faced scandal, oppression, and relentless public scrutiny. Years of their romance broke every tradition and confronted royal expectations. Although love has always been complicated, as history has shown, and most especially for a future king. Before King Charles wed Camilla, there had been many romances for Charles. A complicated romance defined by duty, ardor, and expectation. The story of Prince Charles's dating life is almost the plot for a grand historical drama, full of hindsight and bittersweetness, from his time at Trinity College, Cambridge, to the much-publicized romance of Lady Diana Spencer. His love, it seems, was truly a balancing act of personal wishes versus the rigid standards of the monarchy. Now, King Charles III and Queen Camilla will celebrate their 20th wedding anniversary on April 9, 2025, with renewed hope and promise. But many would like to know more about the king's incredible tale of love, survival, and second chances. How has he stood against overwhelming odds within the institution in uncertain times? Pragmatic and revealing advice. During his 20s, Charles was carried away through rove after rove, societal expectations, and an ever-powerful sense of duty. Under the vigilant eye of Lord Louis Mountbatten, his great-uncle and mentor, a youthful prince embraced all the pleasures of youth that were seldom offered to a royal, open-handedly. Mountbatten, having known the pressures and privileges from within the fold of royalty, saw no reason as to why Charles should be rushed into marriage. Instead, he encouraged the prince to live life to the fullest, giving up that life only when he honestly had to embrace the constraints of royal married life. To Mountbatten, who wrote to Charles on July 9, 1974, giving him both practical and revealing counsel on this matter. In a case like yours, the man should sow his wild oats and have as many affairs as he can before settling down. But for a wife, he should choose a suitable, attractive, and sweet-charactered girl before she meets anyone she might fall for. It was a roadmap to an exquisitely crafted love life that sanctioned indiscretions but punished when picking out a future queen. Unfolding his charm, Charles made worthy of an entry as an eager bachelor into a world with all the pomp of solemn grandeur. Throughout the 1920s, his name was linked with 20-plus women. Some were just meek attempts at dalliance. Others were more profound entanglements, leaving the women equally, if not more, impressed. But the question remained as an unspoken assumption. Was she the one? The one woman who could win his heart and bear the brunt of unrelenting scrutiny associated with the life of a royal consort? During an interview with the BBC later that same year, Charles spoke of the burden of his choice. "This is very difficult," he added, "because you've got to remember that when you marry, in my position, you're going to marry somebody who perhaps one day is going to become queen." He said his decision could not be made lightly because the woman beside him would carry expectations beyond those of an ordinary wife. "You've got to choose somebody very carefully, I think, who can fulfill this particular role, because people like you, perhaps, would expect quite a lot from somebody like that. And it's got to be somebody pretty special." Yet while the prince's heart sought genuine connection, the expectations of his lineage often dictated otherwise. Biographer Christopher Wilson later remarked that Charles had a string of arm candy, women who, while enchanting, were frequently chosen as much for their appearance on his arm as for any deep emotional connection. While he genuinely fell in love with a few, many were simply companions for the glittering ballrooms and regal gatherings that defined his world. Anyways, from aristocratic daughters to celebrated actresses, and even the older sister of his future wife, who were these women who walked beside him, if only for a moment, before stepping back into the shadows of history? The first love. In the late 1960s, within the hallowed halls of Trinity College, Cambridge, the young Prince Charles found himself caught in the tumult of first love. It came in the shape of Lucia Santa Cruz, daughter of the Chilean ambassador to London, an intelligent, sophisticated woman 5 years older than him. However, their romance was shadowed by a deep passion that imprinted the young prince's heart. Charles and Lucia were introduced by a mutual friend at one of his dinner parties. They soon began to share a relationship beyond infatuation. As biographer Sally Bedell Smith again puts it, above all, she was worldly, charming, and deeply influential in shaping Charles's understanding of love and companionship. Later, his cousin would describe her as the first real love of his life. But fate had other plans. In what can only be described as an ironic twist of destiny, Lucia, his first love, set the stage for his great love. Seeing that Charles was searching for a suitable match, she introduced him to Camilla Shand, a young woman she believed to be perfect for him. According to Charles' authorized biographer, Jonathan Dimbleby, Lucia confidently told the prince she had just the girl for him. However, their romance was quickly over. Lucia was still there in the world of Charles. She was more of a private friend to him, always being a part of his life. In hindsight, Lucia Santa Cruz was not just another brief chapter in the love story of Charles. Rather, she was the woman who unknowingly arranged the most important love story of his life. Again, which other romance had been sealed in those aristocratic circles of British high society? A relationship with youthful ease, life before those days of heavy royal duty and single status intrigued the press and the public. King Charles III had a brief romance with a very aristocratic young woman named Caroline Longman, whose family was so closely woven into the fabric of the royal family that it needed no introduction. Not only was Caroline's mother, Lady Elizabeth Lambert, well known at court, but she was also a close friend of Queen Elizabeth II, having stood alongside the young queen as a bridesmaid at her wedding to Prince Philip. That trust and friendship extended to the next generation. The queen was named Caroline's godmother when Caroline was born. After all the long-standing connections between Caroline and Charles' families, their match would have seemed to be a natural development. Their relationship, which blossomed in the 1970s, was one of nonchalance. The two were often spotted at polo matches, where Charles, the keen sportsman, played while Caroline watched from the sidelines. They spent hours cruising the countryside with him behind the wheel of his sleek Aston Martin, enjoying quiet escape moments from the rigid expectations about the young prince. There was the quality of promise. It was not only a relationship of love, but also built on that social harmony that usually characterizes royal unions. And yet, despite their seamless connection, the romance did not last. Perhaps it was the lack of an undeniable spark, or the looming pressures of Charles's future role that made commitment impossible. Whatever the reason, their relationship faded, but the friendship between their families endured. Lady Elizabeth Lambert remained close to the Queen well into her 90s, and the Longmans continued to orbit the royal world long after Charles had moved on. Curiously, Caroline's ties to royalty did not end with Charles. Her sister, Rose Hanbury, would later become a name whispered in the corridors of palace intrigue. A member of British high society and the Marchioness of Cholmondeley, Rose found herself at the center of swirling rumors decades later, linked not to Charles, but to his eldest son, Prince William. Speculation ran rampant in 2022, with the tabloids abuzz over unconfirmed whispers of an alleged affair. While both sides have put on disclaimers concerning the issue, sources close to the royal couple and the Hanburys dismissed the allegations entirely. Still, the scandal would not die. Anyway, what other brief romance may have been a mere footnote in history? But the echoes of the aristocratic world and the dramas that unfolded within it cut it short. A not-so-suitable match. While the world may see Queen Camilla as King Charles III's destined love, history tells a different story. Another woman nearly claimed that title. Davina Sheffield, a name that has since faded into the shadows of royal romance, was once described as the soulmate he was searching for. The words come from royal expert Penny Junor in her book The Firm, The Troubled Life of the House of Windsor, revealing a love story that burned brightly before being extinguished by the unyielding expectations of the monarchy. When Charles met Davina for the first time, she was 24 years old, a beauty in her own right. Davina had good breeding, being the granddaughter of the late Lord McGowan and the sister of future Prime Minister David Cameron. But beyond her aristocratic background, she was much more than a pretty face. Having spirit and intelligence, she shared the prince's interests, making her a good match and an excellent friend. There was, however, one complication. When Charles set his sights on her, she was already in a relationship with James Beard, a dashing powerboat racer. It was a situation that might have discouraged some, but not the future king. Charles was determined and relentless in his pursuit, and eventually won her over. As Junor put it, Charles was so persistent that she eventually succumbed, and the boyfriend soon fell by the wayside. For a time, it seemed Charles had found precisely what he was looking for. Their relationship flourished, and whispers of an impending proposal swirled. But then, as has happened so many times in royal history, tradition came knocking. As media attention grew, so did the scrutiny of Davina's past. The press soon uncovered that she and James Beard had lived in sin, a phrase that, at the time, spelt disaster for a woman who might one day be queen. The revelation that she was not intact, a term as antiquated as it is cruel, proved an insurmountable obstacle. Though Charles was deeply in love, the unwritten rules of the monarchy were merciless. The romance, which had seemed so promising, ended abruptly. It killed the relationship stone, Junor wrote, noting that Charles was devastated by the loss. It was not the first time royal tradition interfered with matters of the heart. Years earlier, Camilla had been dismissed as a potential bride for similar reasons. However, did the weight of tradition prove stronger than even the most persistent prince? Let's see. The search for a suitable bride. Few stories in the interesting circle of royal romance are as curious as Lady Sarah Spencer and her brief relationship with Prince Charles. Sarah, the eldest daughter of the 8th Earl Spencer and older sister to Diana, briefly captured the prince's attention in 1970. Yet, as with many of Charles's early relationships, the romance was not meant to last. The reason for their separation was as revealing as it was unexpected. Unlike the carefully measured discretion expected of those in royal circles, Sarah was unabashedly candid about her courtship with Charles. She spoke openly to the press about their relationship, which did not sit well with the future king. The romance fizzled, but rather than harbor resentment, Sarah took on an unexpected role in Charles's love life. Matchmaker. "I introduced them," she would later say of Charles and Diana. "I'm Cupid." With Sarah in the rearview mirror, Charles pressed on in his quest for a suitable bride. By 1980, his attention turned to another aristocratic match. Lady Amanda Natch Poole, granddaughter of his beloved great-uncle and mentor, Lord Louis Mountbatten. On paper, Amanda was an ideal candidate. She was intelligent and poised and shared many of Charles' interests, making her a natural fit for the role of future queen. Royal biographer Howard Hodgson in Charles. "The man who will be king described her as someone who found herself drawn to the prince's energy, enthusiasm, sense of fun, kindness, and modest self-deprecation. She admired his depth and the quiet sensitivity that few truly understood. But admiration alone was not enough to secure a joint future. When Charles asks Amanda to marry him, she hesitates, not because of her lack of care for him, but because of the oppressive reality of marrying into the royal family. She had seen the perpetual scrutiny of the royal spotlight and the pressure on whoever stood beside the heir to the throne, and she wanted no part of it. The rejection that she gave him was a decision that had to have hurt Charles quite a lot. It must have been yet another failed attempt to find a companion who could bear the burden of royal expectations. Along the way began a search winding through its share of years with longing, scandal, and heartbreak before culminating in a proposal for Diana. But how did the match, then so lauded, turn out to be everything but what the world had expected to be a fairy tale? The royal spouse. The first meeting between Lady Diana Spencer and Prince Charles was as unassuming as fateful. In 1977, at just 16 years old, Diana was introduced to the prince through her older sister, Lady Sarah Spencer, who was romantically linked to him then. Charles, then 28, hardly saw her as a prospective partner, recalling years later that she was, at the time, Diana was simply another face in his orbit, spirited, youthful, and far removed from the pressures of royal courtship. It wasn't until 1980, in the wake of a personal tragedy, that their paths were aligned. Lord Louis Mountbatten, Charles's beloved great-uncle and mentor, had been assassinated in an IRA bombing the previous year. By then, 19, Diana conversed with the prince, offering sympathy for his grief. In private recordings later released in the documentary Diana, in her own words, she recounted telling him, her words, and perhaps the purity of her concern, seemed to touch him. Soon, it became apparent that Diana was seriously considered a future queen. The ultimate sign of approval came in November 1980, when she was invited to Balmoral, the royal family's Scottish estate, a rite of passage for any prospective royal spouse. The visit went well. By February 1981, the engagement was officially announced. Their first joint interview following the announcement should have been a moment of unfiltered joy, but it provided an unsettling glimpse into their emotional disparity. When asked by an interviewer, Diana immediately responded with a giggle, "Of course." Charles, however, gave a more ambiguous reply. The words casual on the surface hinted at the challenges that would later define their marriage. What followed was a wedding so grand, it seemed to belong in the pages of a fairy tale. On July 29, 1981, Diana walked down the aisle at St. Paul's Cathedral in a spectacle watched by an estimated 750 million people worldwide. The ceremony was hailed as the wedding of the century, a union that, at least to the outside world, embodied romance and modern-day royalty at its finest. But behind the grandeur, cracks were already forming. The couple welcomed two sons, William in 1982 and Harry in 1984. Still, the pressures of their marriage and the glaring reality that their connection had never been built on a firm emotional foundation soon became undeniable. By 1986, Charles had rekindled his relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles, a love that had predated Diana, but had been deemed unsuitable for a future king. Diana, too, found solace elsewhere, engaging in an affair with James Hewitt, a former cavalry officer. The unraveling of their union reached its climax in 1992, when then Prime Minister John Major formally announced their separation. Was it necessary to strip Diana of her royal title? The royal divorce. Well, I think the whole affair of the royal divorce is very sad. 4 years later, the divorce was finalized. Tragically, just 1 year after the dissolution of her marriage, Diana's life was cut short. On August 31st, 1997, the world awoke to the shocking news that the People's Princess had died in a car crash in Paris alongside her partner, Dodi Fayed, and their driver, Henri Paul. What began as a seemingly fairy tale romance had ended in heartbreak and loss, a story forever etched into the collective memory of a generation. However, at the heart of it all was a love story that was never entirely meant to be, but came to stay. What love story is this? A love that was never meant to be. Their first encounter in the summer of 1970 was said to be filled with charm and wit. At a polo game in Great Windsor Park, Camilla Shand, a spirited debutante, was introduced to Prince Charles. With a knowing glint in her eye, it is said that she gave him a playful nudge. Regardless of whether the words were said precisely as recalled, they carved out an indelible connection. Charles, captivated by her warmth and humor, later described their relationship as blissful, peaceful, and mutually happy. But happiness alone could not shield them from the expectations of tradition. Their romance ended with Charles being drawn into royal duty and Camilla deemed unsuitable as a future queen. She soon married Andrew Parker Bowles in 1973, while Charles, years later, wed Lady Diana Spencer in what the world believed to be a fairy tale match. Yet the pull between Charles and Camilla remained even within their respective marriages. Diana had sensed it early, finding a gold bracelet Charles had made for Camilla just before their wedding, a symbol of an attachment that had never truly faded. By 1986, their affair had resumed, though it was only publicly acknowledged years later after their marriage had